and welcome to Learning with Lulu. In today's video, we are going to do a summary of chapter 3 in the Scarlet letter. At the end of the video, before you go, please make sure to like it, comment your thoughts on the chapter, share with others that you know may benefit, and last of all, subscribe to the channel. Chapter 3 in the Scarlet letter, we have Hester Prynne holding her young daughter Pearl, who's I believe about 3 or 4 months old, and she's standing on the scaffold. She has the embroidered scarlet letter on her dress telling everyone that she has committed the sin of adultery. She's having to stand up there to make her feel shame, and also as like an example to set for the community of something to deter everyone from committing the same sin, or at least being caught in committing the same sin, as we'll get into in some subsequent chapters. She's standing there holding her daughter, and as she is there, she sees a ways off a indigenous American, a Native American. It says that that's not so uncommon in their early colony town of Boston. She's not noticing this Native American because of that aspect, but because of who is with him. He seems to have a companion who Hester very quickly recognizes by his one shoulder raised above the other and his appearance. So despite this other man's appearance of having a really strange mixture of European and indigenous clothing, she quickly recognizes her husband, who had been missing for the past, I want to say past couple of years. Just as a little background on that, she is from England. She was bound in marriage to this scholarly man. They were together in Amsterdam, and he sent her ahead to the Americas and was meant to follow, but never did. And so everyone just pretty much assumed that he was dead at the bottom of the sea, essentially. And she sees him there now. She recognizes him immediately. You can tell that there's some familiarity even after all this time between the two. Now, not only is Hester struck by his mixture of apparel, she also just notices his countenance. I don't get the sense that he's looking at her super judgmentally. She says that has this look of like almost a calm wisdom about him. I don't know if she uses the term calm, but definitely there's some wise countenance to him. We learned that he was captured and has been kept by some Native American tribe for the past long while, that his companion now was helping him get back to white settlement or European settlement. Hester's newly returned from the dead husband, he is not going to reveal himself as her husband. And we very quickly learn this. In subsequent chapters, we are going to learn that he's referring to himself as Roger Chillingworth. And I am very mixed on his reasoning for this. It's been a long time since I've read this, so my reviewing of these chapters before I make these videos, it's a little bit of a reminder, and then also a little bit of just kind of, oh, I had completely forgotten that. And so I have not quite come to my conclusion of his motive for doing things. I have read a couple chapters ahead of this one. What he's about to do after they make eye contact and there's this mutual familiarity and understanding of like, hey, I know who you are. It's a little unclear to me as of yet if he is not revealing his true identity as her long lost husband out of mercy and like protection of her. Because if you think about it, that would just add drama to her story and her situation for people to suddenly have her husband back and be like, can you believe what your wife did, essentially? I don't know if that's exactly how it would react. That's maybe more of a modern reaction. We know that the Puritan handling of her actions is very harsh and judgmental and hypocritical. He may be doing it out of protection of her. And then there's also this part of me that's wondering if there's some degree of emotional manipulation going on there, which you'll definitely see in the next chapter, which is the interview, which is where they finally have a chance to talk. That's where I kind of wonder if there is a little bit of manipulation going on, almost being the kind of like, oh, I'm being so kind and merciful to you, or I'm taking such good care of you, even despite you doing this to me, kind of thing like that. Let me know your thoughts. I would love to hear other people's thoughts on why her returned husband chooses to do the things he does. So anyway, she sees him as she's standing on the scaffold. There's a look of familiarity between them, and he subtly gestures to her like, keep quiet. He holds his finger over his mouth of like a don't say anything. And then I think in a twofold action, one, to continue this act of not knowing who she is, setting himself up as a stranger, but also to learn what's going on. He turns to someone in the crowd and says, I'm new to this area. I've been being held captive by the Native Americans. Who's this lady? What's her crime? Why is she being punished in this way? The Boston townsman is essentially just, oh, like, yeah, you must be a stranger here. If you haven't heard about Hester, you know, Hester Prynne, and he says she was married to an Englishman. So maybe they were both English. I don't know why they would be in Amsterdam then, but he says that she was the wife of a learned Englishman. They decided to come to America. She was sent on ahead. He stayed behind to wrap things up, and he was going to follow her after, but he never did. And then here's the part of her husband saying something that I'm like, why would he say that? He says, you know, her husband must have been foolish to think that he could keep such a young, beautiful wife happy. He asks the townsman, he says, so who's the baby's father? You know, he points out, again, that it takes two people to make a baby. Who's the father? She's not alone in her apparent crime. The townsman says, you know, she refuses to reveal his identity. So here we get into a little bit where in the previous chapter, I was pointing out how they're so focused on her, but who's the father? In this chapter, we do see that the town really is like, yeah, she's not alone in this. There is another half to this sin. They are really wanting her to reveal who it is, and it's in this chapter that Hester's not wanting to reveal who it is. And whether out of genuine love for the baby's father, or when we find out who the father is, maybe she realizes that she would be looked at even more harshly, but she goes on to protect the identity of her little Pearl's father. At the end of the chapter, we get these men seated up above Hester, up above the scaffold, looking down on her, asking her to reveal who the baby's father is. So she's going through this punishment. She has to stand for 3 hours with her infant child on the scaffold, and then for her lifetime wear this scarlet letter. And the townsman explains that to this Roger Chillingsworth, Hester's husband. I want you to just think about how unchristian that scene is, though, of a woman with her child standing on a scaffold as punishment, and these men of the church, these magistrates, I believe, seated up above her. You know, if you are familiar with biblical scripture at all, you have Christ saying, whoever is sinless, be the first, you know, can cast the first stone. And of course nobody can. And the biblical character, or the historical man, however you perceive this person of Christ, if you actually read the stuff we have about him, he was so loving and so understanding and forgiving. And it's just this moment that you have of these Puritans treating this woman in this manner. It's just so un-Christian. Like, so much of history, things done in the name of Christianity are so un-Christian. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. We are introduced to, as they say, the town fathers who sit in judgment of Hester. So we have Governor Bellingham, Reverend Wilson, and Reverend Dimsdale. And Dimsdale, pay attention to this, it describes him as a younger man. He's renowned not only for his eloquence, but also his fervor and his theological understanding and deep study. He's respected. And it's him that the other two were kind of like, hey, you're in charge of taking care of this community. You need to get Hester to reveal who the father is. Dimsdale, Reverend Dimsdale, he does question her, and there's a deepness to their looks at each other, which, read into that as you will. And he says, don't protect this man's identity out of pity. You not revealing who he is isn't helping him, because he needs to share in essentially in the punishment that you are being subjected to. I think they even say something to the effect of like, his condemnation is double because he's letting you take this alone. Hester really strongly refuses. It says the only father that her little daughter, that Pearl, will ever know is her father in heaven. She refuses to reveal the identity of Pearl's father. After she refuses, the older Reverend Wilson, starts to deliver a sermon. This just, as an audience member of this sounds miserable and kind of ridiculous. And Reverend Wilson just starts to talk about sin, frequently referring to this beautiful young mother with her beautiful child as, essentially being subject to the fiery brimstone of hell. The scarlet letter that she has so beautifully embroidered, as he talks about how sinful and evil it is, it says that, the crowd almost sees it as this glowing, burning ember. At one point in his lengthy sermon, Pearl cries and Hester does her best to calm her. And when the sermon is finally over, Hester is taken back to the prison. And that's chapter 3. It's going to be addressed in later chapters, but earlier how I mentioned, those of you that quote from, I believe it's in the New Testament, of, those of you with no sin can be the first one to cast the stone. In a later chapter, it talks about how if we were truthful, how many people in the town would be bearing their own scarlet letter. Maybe not the letter A for adultery, but for various other sins. The reverends included, the governor included, and yet they place themselves up above the scaffold. Think of it as like heaven and hell, and giving them this religious authority, when really there's so much hypocrisy going on. And I'm not saying that in human society and human systems that we shouldn't have consequences for crimes, but so often there's unrighteous judgment, I guess you can say, hypocrisy, and just the men placing themselves, the 3 men, oh my goodness, like this trinity of men placing themselves up above the woman and the child, the continuation of human life. I mean, we can get into a whole analysis of religion in another video if you're interested. But these 3 men who are not without sin, who are not perfect, putting themselves in a position to almost stand in the place of God. And there's this quote, speaking of religions that have a male-only deity, that essentially say if God is a man, then man is God. And I feel like this chapter, you see that. When really in nature, in the universe, there is a balance of masculine and feminine. You know, these three men who aren't without sin, who aren't perfect, putting themselves in the place of God, condemning this woman who, in her situation, in her context, I feel like you can have sympathy for her choices, her actions, and for what she did. And her as a symbol, just in that moment of the beautiful young mother holding the beautiful child, the feminine being the, you know, the vessel that can create life, that continues life. I mean, the oldest religions that we can archaeologically discover, that is holy. The female being the, you know, the fertile earth that continues the human genome. And so, yeah, there's a lot there. Please let me know your thoughts on this chapter. Please let me know your thoughts on any of these extra thoughts that I've thrown in. Yeah, I hope this video helps you kind of have a grasp on chapter 3 and the Scarlet Letter. Before you go, please make sure to subscribe, like the video, comment, and share with others that you know are going to need summaries and breakdowns of the chapters in Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you around. Bye.